Earlier this month, the New York Times ran a story with the headline, "White Evangelical Resistance is Obstacle in Vaccination Effort." And the response from the left was almost immediate.
This is now going to become a public health problem. White evangelical resistance is now an obstacle, per the New York Times, to the vaccination effort. As you just mentioned, millions of white evangelical adults in the U.S. do not intend to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Mistrust of science, mistrust of et cetera, and also their politics. Now this is a public health issue. What can be done about that if in their churches they're preaching against getting the vaccine? Because that means, I don't know how we get to herd immunity without 28% of the population.
Well, we're not going to get there, first of all. And secondarily, we're going to have a lot of funerals in those churches where they refuse to wear masks and everything else because they believe that Jesus is going to save them and that it's just my time. But again, this is about the selfishness and where evangelicalism has gone. And it's really quite a shame. There are things that have been good historically about the movement, but this anti-science sentiment and the ways in which they are digging their heels in promises to be an absolute debacle for them. When you put this on top of the racism where they're calling, the coronavirus, the Chinese virus, and all of these other things that, their Lord and Savior Donald Trump said, then you have to add up and wonder what is really wrong with these people that they continue to go against the best interests of not just themselves, but the rest of society in order to be recalcitrant. There's nothing about this, absolutely nothing, that says anything about what Jesus Christ taught. It is a movement that is stuck on itself and not on the person who is supposed to be the center of it.
That was MSNBC's Joy Reid and Anthea Butler. Now, for those on radio, you can't see the smirk on my face, but that is, of course, MSNBC, and you say, well, so what? That's what you expect from them. I mean, of course, I know no one with half a brain listens to them. That's true. But then there's NPR with a very similar, albeit toned down, narrative.
Nationally, white evangelicals report a high degree of vaccine hesitancy. In one recent survey, just over half said they were likely to get vaccinated, compared to 64% of evangelicals of color. Both groups were well below the rate for non-evangelicals, 77%.
Now, let me read a portion of the New York Times piece with my commentary inserted. Now, let me just say, going back to Joy Reid for just a moment, I've not heard a single sermon preached about not getting a vaccine. Not heard it. Now, I've not been in every church in America, but I doubt there are many sermons being preached about not getting a vaccine. But let me go to this article. White evangelical resistance is obstacle in vaccination effort. Tenets of faith and mistrust of science play a role, so does politics. Now, don't forget that line. Now, Stephanie Nana, an evangelical Christian in Edmond, Oklahoma, refused to get a COVID-19 vaccine because she believed it contained aborted cell tissue. Okay, now let me address that issue. This is me speaking. There are 3 vaccines that have been approved: Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. Pfizer and Moderna do not contain fetal tissue in the development or the production of those vaccines. Johnson & Johnson does. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been temporarily halted for use because of blood clotting that has occurred in some recipients of the vaccine, but there are reports that they may halt or restart the use of that vaccine this weekend. All right, let me go on to the article here. The sheer size of the community poses, this is talking about the evangelical community, the sheer size of the community poses a major problem for the country's ability to recover from a pandemic that has resulted in the deaths of 500,000 Americans. And evangelical ideas and instincts have a way of spreading, even internationally. There are about 41 million white evangelical adults in America. About 45% said in late February that they would not get vaccinated against COVID-19, making them among the least likely demographic groups to do so, according to Pew Research Center. Now, this is me talking again. That's interesting that they talk about the grave threat that the influence of this group has, because usually the press loathes to acknowledge the influence of the evangelical community, especially around election time, when they report that the community is dying. Well, let me go on. White evangelicals present unique challenges because of their complex web of moral, medical, and political objections. The challenge is further complicated by the long-standing distrust between evangelicals and the scientific community. All right, this is me again. Well, I guess so. Those promoting science treat it as a smorgasbord where they get to pick and choose what science they want. They reject the science that shows a baby in the womb is a distinct human being with their own identity, not a blob of tissue or an unnecessary appendage of the mother. Not to mention the denial of the biological reality that they're just two genders, two sexes, male and female. All right, going on with the article. No clear data is available about vaccine hesitancy among evangelicals or other racial groups, but religious reasoning often spreads beyond white churches. Now, let me read that again, because this whole article is about how evangelicals are not getting the vaccine and vaccine hesitancy among evangelicals poses a threat to the nation. But now they're saying, let me read again, quote, no clear data is available about vaccine hesitancy among evangelicals or other racial groups, but religious reasoning often spreads beyond white churches. Sounds like we don't know this to be true, but we're going to say it anyway. Evangelicals are putting the nation at risk by not getting vaccinated. I mean, that's what I read in this piece. Now, I'm going to address what I think is at the heart of this matter. But before I do, I want to talk directly about the vaccine. First, is the coronavirus vaccine like a flu shot or a vaccine, say, like for the measles, which will protect you for life? Well, according to Pfizer, their test says it's good for at least 6 months. Beyond that, it's too soon to tell. So I just hope that people realize that this is not a one and done. This will probably be like the annual flu shot. And sometimes I get the flu shot, sometimes I don't. Just depends. Now, I have not gotten the corona shot. It's not because I'm against vaccines or against these shots. I had the virus last summer, and my latest blood test shows that the antibodies were in my blood. Now, if I were in a high-risk category or had someone in my home that was in a high-risk category, I would get the Pfizer or Moderna shot. I would not get the Johnson & Johnson because of ethical concerns. Now, I want to get back to the New York Times and their evangelical shaming for not getting the 6-month shot. They listed several objections that evangelicals had given to the vaccine, most of them outliers designed to make evangelicals look weird in the eyes of the world. I get it. We come from very different worldviews. I find their fear or phobia of the virus strange myself. I mean, think about it. We shut down our whole economy, our social infrastructure, our educational system, and so much more out of the fear of contracting the virus. I mean, I just officiated a member of my family's a funeral for them because they were isolated for about a year, couldn't even have contact with their immediate family, and that put them over the edge. Now think about that. That's never been done before on the scale that we just went through. And what happened? Over 500,000 people died from the virus. Yeah, I understand that. And we don't know yet just how many people died, but we know it's safe to say tens of thousands of others died from the isolation through various means. Fear is an indicator of spiritual uncertainty. We don't need to be reckless. That's why I suggest those in high-risk categories get an ethical dose of the COVID shot. But let me turn to what I see driving the shaming of evangelicals. Now, this is not isolated to the U.S. We've seen this happen in other countries during the pandemic. We've tracked this at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. We've seen where churches and religious communities were blamed without evidence for the spread of the virus. Now, here in the U.S., this is just another turn of the dial in increasing the intensity of the effort to marginalize evangelicals in the eyes of the broader community. We've watched this growing hostility toward evangelicals, especially since their successful support of Donald Trump. You see, because he did more to stop and even reverse the left's anti-life, anti-family, anti-biblical morality agenda than any president in my lifetime. And he did it in large part because evangelicals supported him. You see, evangelicals have become a political problem. Note the second line of the New York Times article. Tenets of faith and mistrust of science play a role, so does politics. Well, they're not the first to identify politics as a problem when it comes to Christians. Remember Nero, who blamed the fire that destroyed Rome on the Christians, using the fire for his political advantage to target this group who would not yield to him as a divine? Evangelicals are a problem for those who see the government of man above this and superior to that of God, a God that they see as little more than a product of superstition. This is about a whole lot more than a vaccine. This is about a worldview that increasingly are worlds apart. All the more reason we must not shrink back in silence or hide in the shadows when it comes to our Christian faith. Joining me now to talk more about this is David Claussen, who is the director of our Center for Biblical Worldview and Christian Ethics. David, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Tony.
All right, so your thoughts on what the New York Times is attempting to do with this shaming piece of evangelicals?
I think you hit it right on the nose, Tony, and we've increasingly been seeing this. Remember January 6th, the attack at the U.S. Capitol. Who was to blame? Was it a rabid mob that got out of control? No, it was so-called Christian nationalism. During the spread of the coronavirus, who did they want to blame for it? Oh, it was the churches that were continuing to meet, even though they were wearing masks and socially distancing. I remember even Samaritan's Purse came under attack for trying to have field hospitals in Central Park in New York. And so we've seen it over the last year, but like you said, with Nero, this has been going on for a very long time, that Christians, especially evangelical Christians, are the boogeyman, and the left sees them as a problem. So I think your analysis right there is right on, and we need to realize what's going on. They are seeking to shame us and silence us and drive us from the public square.
And I've been very clear about this. I mean, I think if you are in a category where you're at risk, I think you should get one of the ethical shots. I'm not against the science, but I don't think we should be forced to get it. I don't think that we should be shamed into getting it. I think we should make those decisions ourselves. Now, I want to go back to the New York Times piece because there was actually a thoughtful statement in here from the professor of sociology and director of the religion and public life at Rice University, Elaine Ucklin. She said, there has been a sea change over the past century in how evangelical Christians see science, a change rooted largely in the debates over evolution and the secularization of the academy. There are two parts to the problem, she said. The scientific community has not been as friendly toward evangelicals, and the religious community has not encouraged followers to pursue careers in science. I mean, we do see this selective use of science, which makes those who see truth, believers, as transcendent. Truth doesn't change with the day of the week or whoever's in public office. Right. I mean, truth is truth. But we see those that advocate for science on one hand dismiss the science on another.
No, and that's why an argument like that, Tony, just seems to have so much hypocrisy in it. Because especially those who, I think today is Earth Day, and people were talking about climate change and global warming. That was the big focus of the White House today. But again, this is the same White House through executive orders and public statements that is radically pro-abortion, that doesn't recognize the personhood of the unborn. An administration that has put out executive orders that don't recognize the biological sex of male and female. And so when you're so selective in the reading of the science, well, it's just hypocritical, and it doesn't engender very much trust amongst people like you and I.
Especially when you use, that's a good example that you use on global warming, climate change. They want to change the terms to make it more palatable. But the fact that the science there, even John Kerry acknowledging that, if we eliminate our emissions completely, we can't turn the dial. We can't move the needle on this. The fact is the problem is so big, and I'm not denying that the fact that there is the Earth atmosphere climate is constantly changing. Sometimes hot, sometimes cold. It changes. It's done that throughout history. But we can never hold them accountable for the claims that if we do this, we can address global warming, because you can never measure it. It's too big of a problem, and it's so removed. But the issue of human life, whether or not the baby in a womb is a child, and whether or not you fund or force abortion through the funding of tax dollars, that is very measurable.
Yeah, no, it's very measurable. And again, as Christians, we believe that all truth is God's truth. And so, yeah, the Scripture tells us about the person of the unborn, but science is very clear. I think you can detect a heartbeat within 2 weeks. And so that selective reading of science, again, all that does is engender suspicion because it's just rank hypocrisy.
We're almost out of time here, David, but we are worldviews apart.
Yes.
How do we? Well, I think we're just about out of time. But you've got resources available. Where can people find out how we navigate this separation of worldviews?
Yeah, we have a lot of worldview resources here at Family Research Council, and all these, Tony, are at frc.org/worldview.
All right, David Claussen, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony.